environmental groups hadn't demonstrated that Montana's plans, wolf hunting and trapping season, posed a threat of irreparable injury to the species.
Montana had a plan that seemed perfect on paper. The goal was simple: remove the coyotes to save the ranching industry and protect the herds. It was a massive effort involving time, money, and manpower across thousands of acres of rugged terrain.
Wolves are quite a controversial issue. However, since they were delisted in 2011 here in the state, and the state started to management, hunters were able to hunt the wolves, and then they added trapping. It started to decrease.
They thought they had solved the problem for good. But here is the catch. Instead of disappearing, the coyotes did something that biologists are still trying to understand today. The population did not just recover, it exploded. The very strategy designed to end them actually triggered a biological chain reaction that no one saw coming. The predator that won't quit. For over a century, the American West has been the stage for a silent battle. It is a conflict between the growing needs of human expansion and the wild, unpredictable forces of nature. In Montana, this battle focused on one animal, the coyote. To the ranchers and farmers living out on the vast stretches of land, this animal was not just a nuisance, it was a direct threat to their livelihood. Sheep, calves, and other livestock were constant targets. The solution seemed obvious to everyone involved. If you have a predator causing problems, you remove the predator. It is simple math. If you take 5 apples away from 10 apples, you have 5 left. So, the logic was that if you aggressively reduce the number of coyotes, the livestock would be safe, and the ecosystem would balance itself out. This was not a small operation. We are talking about a coordinated effort across millions of square miles of mountains, prairies, and valleys. It was a strategy that had worked for other animals. Wolves, for example, were successfully driven out of many areas in the lower 48 states because they could not handle the pressure. Bears retreated to the deep woods. Everyone assumed the coyote would follow the same pattern. They were wrong. The operations in Montana were thorough. Agencies and locals worked tirelessly to clear the land. For a short time, it seemed to work. The howling stopped. The sightings dropped to near zero. It felt like victory. But here is the catch. Nature does not always play by our rules, especially when it comes to this specific animal. Biologists started noticing something strange a few years after the pressure was applied. The population numbers did not stay down. In fact, they started to creep back up, surpassing the numbers that existed before the removal began. This is where things get mysterious. In a normal ecosystem, when a population drops, it takes a long time to recover. Animals need to find mates, establish territories, and raise young, which usually takes years. But the coyote recovery was rapid. It was almost instant. It was as if they were waiting for this exact moment. Reports started coming in from all over the state. Areas that had been completely cleared were suddenly full of tracks again. And it was not just that they were back, they were occupying territories that were previously empty. Recent research, like studies from the University of New Hampshire, has shed light on this phenomenon. They found that despite intense pressure from humans and larger predators, like cougars, coyotes are not just surviving, they are thriving. It turns out that these animals have a unique biological response to stress. When their numbers drop, they do not give up. They go into overdrive. Basically, the removal efforts triggered a survival mechanism that had been dormant. By disrupting their social structure, we inadvertently kicked off a biological chain reaction. The stable packs that controlled the population were broken up. Usually in a stable pack, only the alpha pair breeds. The other members are there to help raise the pups and defend the territory. They do not have puppies of their own. This natural system keeps the population in check. It limits how many new mouths there are to feed. But when the removal programs targeted these areas, that social structure collapsed. The alphas were gone. Suddenly, all those younger subordinate animals who were not breeding before, they were now free agents. They paired up, established their own smaller territories, and started having families of their own. Instead of one pack producing 1 litter of pups, you suddenly had 3 or 4 pairs producing litters in the same amount of space. The numbers are staggering. A female who might normally have 4 or 5 pups was now having litters of 8 or 9. This is nature's way of balancing the scales. The more pressure you apply, the harder the species pushes back. It is a paradox that frustrated wildlife managers for decades. They were spending millions of dollars and thousands of hours trying to solve a problem, but every dollar spent seemed to purchase 2 more coyotes. The crazy part is that this did not just happen in the wild corners of Montana. This resilience allowed them to expand their range dramatically. While they were being pushed in the west, they were quietly moving east, north, and south. They used the pressure as fuel to colonize new lands. They moved into gaps left by wolves and started to take over. This was the first domino to fall in the chain reaction. The intent was to wipe them out to save the herds. The result was a younger, faster breeding population that was more resilient than ever before. The silence on the plains was just an illusion. It was not the end of the coyote, it was just the deep breath before they multiplied. And as the ranchers looked out over their fences, they realized that the game had changed completely. The removal didn't just add more animals, it actually changed their biological blueprint in a terrifying way. Biology versus human strategy. It sounds like science fiction, but the coyote essentially possesses a biological superpower. Scientists call it compensatory reproduction, but you can think of it as survival mode on steroids. To understand why Montana's plan failed so spectacularly, we have to look inside the pack. Most people think of a pack of wild dogs as just a group of friends running together. It is actually much more complex than that. It is a strict hierarchy, almost like a military unit or a royal family. In a settled, undisturbed area, the pack is ruled by the alpha pair. They are the king and queen. They are the only ones allowed to have puppies. The rest of the pack, the betas, the omegas, the yearlings, are biologically suppressed. Their hormones literally change to prevent them from breeding. They stick around to hunt and protect the alpha's pups. This keeps the population stable. If there is only so much food in a valley, you cannot have 50 puppies running around. The pack limits itself to stay healthy. So, here is the deal. When the removal efforts began in Montana, they didn't just remove individuals, they shattered this social structure. When the alpha pair is removed, the suppression is lifted. It is like the boss leaving the office and everyone suddenly throwing a party. All those younger coyotes who were waiting for their turn suddenly get the green light. Their hormone levels spike. They split off from the group and find mates. Suddenly, where you had one family controlling 20 square miles, you now have 4 different families trying to squeeze into that same space. And they are all breeding. But it gets even wilder. Nature senses that the population is in danger. When the density of coyotes drops, there is more food available for the ones that are left. More mice, more rabbits, more berries. This abundance of food sends a signal to the female's body. Her body realizes that the environment can support more life. So instead of having a normal litter of 4 pups, her body adjusts. She might release more eggs during ovulation. Suddenly, litters of 7, 8, or even 9 pups become common. And because there is less competition for food, more of those pups survive to adulthood. This is why the population curves in Montana look like a roller coaster. A sharp drop followed by a vertical climb, and that is putting it lightly. The pups born during these boom times mature faster. In a stable pack, a female might not breed until she is 2 or 3 years old. In a disrupted population, females can start breeding at just 10 months old. They are essentially children having children, accelerating the cycle even faster. This is the chain reaction in full swing. By trying to subtract, we force them to multiply. It is remarkably similar to the mythological Hydra. You cut off one head and 2 grow back in its place. But this isn't a myth. It is hard biological fact happening in our backyards. This reaction creates a chaotic landscape. Instead of wise, old coyotes that know to stay away from humans and livestock, the landscape fills up with teenagers. These younger animals are less experienced, more desperate, and often more daring. They haven't learned the boundaries yet. This can actually lead to more conflicts with livestock, which is the exact opposite of what the removal plan intended. What most people don't realize is that this adaptability extends beyond just breeding. They are fission-fusion animals. This means they can live in a pack when it benefits them, or they can split up and live alone or in pairs if that works better. If you put pressure on a pack, they scatter and become invisible. They stop howling, they move only at night. They change their entire lifestyle to avoid detection. In Montana, this meant that the coyotes became ghosts. They learned the traps. They learned to recognize the sound of specific vehicles. They passed this knowledge down to their large litters. We were not just breeding more coyotes, we were effectively selectively breeding smarter coyotes. The ones that were easy to catch were removed early. The ones that survived were the cleverest, the most cautious, and the most adaptable. And those were the ones passing on their genes. This biological superpower makes them nearly impossible to eliminate. You can reduce them for a season, maybe two, but unless you remove every single one from a massive area, which is impossible in the rugged terrain of the West, they will bounce back. And when they do, they come back with a vengeance, fully stocked with large families and a hunger to reclaim their territory. While they were conquering the wild, they began moving into a place no one ever expected to see them. Living in the shadows. The chain reaction did not stop at the edge of the forest. When the pressure in the wild became too intense and the competition from all those new litters increased, the coyotes needed somewhere to go. They looked at the map and saw a new frontier. It wasn't the open plains or the deep woods. It was the suburbs and the cities. This is one of the most surprising twists in the story. For a long time, we thought of these animals as symbols of the wild, untouched wilderness. We associated them with cowboys, deserts, and lonely, moonlit nights. But the modern coyote has traded the cactus for the skyscraper. The population explosion in places like Montana pushed young coyotes to disperse, searching for their own territories. And they found that human cities are actually perfect habitats. Think about it. In the wild, they have to work hard for a meal. They have to chase down a jackrabbit or wrestle a deer fawn. In the city, food is everywhere. Open trash cans, pet food bowls left on porches, fruit falling from ornamental trees, and unfortunately, rats and mice that thrive in our alleys. For a smart, adaptable scavenger, a city is an all-you-can-eat buffet. So, here is the deal. They moved in. They are now in Chicago, Los Angeles, and even New York City. They have been spotted in Central Park, but unlike in Montana, where they are hunted, in the city they are largely ignored. They have learned to look both ways before crossing the street, literally. Biologists tracking urban coyotes have watched them wait for traffic lights to change. They know that cars are dangerous, so they navigate the concrete grid with the same skill they use to navigate the canyons. They have become nocturnal to avoid us. You could be walking your dog at 5 in the morning and walk right past one hiding in a shrub, and you would never know. They have mastered the art of invisibility. This expansion was fueled by the pressure we put on them. By trying to wipe them out in their core territories, we forced them to innovate. We pushed them out of their comfort zone and they realized they could survive anywhere. The crazy part is how they view us. In the wild, a human is a predator, a threat. In the city, a human is just a part of the landscape, like a tree or a lamppost. They don't fear us as much, but they respect the distance. They watch us. They learn our schedules. They know when the park is empty and when the garbage trucks come. This migration changes everything. It means the coyote problem is no longer just a rancher's issue in Montana. It is a suburban issue. It is a city issue. They are in our backyards watching our house cats. The removal efforts of the past century didn't solve the problem. They globalized it. We exported the animal to every corner of the continent. The underground brain. Now, if you think the story of the birds is wild, we need to go deeper. Literally, we need to go underground, because there is a theory gaining traction among some radical ecologists that suggests the forest isn't just a collection of trees. It is a single, intelligent superorganism. And the fire? The fire might actually be part of its communication system. Let's look at what happens right before a fire hits. We used to think trees were just passive sticks of wood standing there waiting to burn. But new research into plant signaling suggests something straight out of a sci-fi movie. When a tree senses extreme heat or smoke nearby, it might actually panic in a biological way. Some scientists believe that trees can send electrical signals through their roots at the speed of sound. It is not quite a text message, but it is a warning. Danger is coming. But here is the wildest part. There is evidence that trees, before they are consumed by flames, might dump their most valuable resources, sugars, carbon, nutrients, down into their root systems. They essentially upload their consciousness into the soil to save it from the hard drive wipe happening above ground. They sacrifice the body to save the data. This is made possible by what people call the Wood Wide Web. It is a massive network of fungi called mycorrhizae. These microscopic threads connect the roots of trees, bushes, and flowers. It is like the internet, but made of fungus. Under normal conditions, trees use this web to trade food or share water. But during a fire, this web might act like a bunker. The theory is that the forest knows the fire is a reset button. So the old trees die, but they leave a massive bank account of energy underground, protected by the soil, which acts as a heat shield. Once the ash cools, that energy doesn't just sit there. It is blasted back up into the new growth. This explains why the wildflowers and shrubs explode out of the ground so fast. They aren't just growing on their own, they are being fueled by the ghosts of the trees that burned down. They are running on the battery power left behind by the giants. This changes how we look at the birds, too. Remember those beetles that the woodpeckers love? The ones that swarm the burnt trees? How do they find the forest so fast? Sure, they smell the smoke, but some researchers wonder if there is an electromagnetic signal involved. When massive amounts of organic matter burn, it releases ions. It changes the electrical charge of the air. It is possible that the forest is essentially sending up a flare, a giant invisible bat signal that tells every creature for 100 miles, dinner is served. If this is true, it means the ecosystem relies on a level of coordination we are only just beginning to understand. The trees die to feed the beetles. The beetles summon the birds. The birds drop seeds that use the nutrients left by the trees. It is a perfect closed loop. But this underground brain theory gets even darker when you think about what humans do. When we use heavy machinery to log a forest after a fire, we crush the soil. We rip up those fungal networks. We sever the cables of the Wood Wide Web. If the forest really is a superorganism, then salvage logging is like performing a lobotomy. We aren't just taking wood, we are destroying the memory of the forest. We are wiping the hard drive. This might be why some logged forests take 100 years to recover while natural burn zones bounce back in 5. We broke the brain. And there is one more layer to this fungal mystery. Some of these fire-loving fungi are incredibly rare. They stay dormant underground for decades, maybe centuries, waiting for the heat signal. They are like sleeper agents. They only wake up when the world ends. These fungi are crucial because they break down the charcoal and turn it into soil. Without them, the forest floor would just be a barren wasteland of carbon. They are the cleanup crew, but they need the heat to activate. If we stop the fires, we keep these agents asleep. We keep the cleanup crew locked in the basement. So the birds flying into the smoke aren't just opportunistic, they are answering a call from a complex underground intelligence that has been managing these disasters for millions of years. We look at a burnt forest and see chaos. The Earth sees a carefully orchestrated demolition and reconstruction project managed by a fungal mind we can barely comprehend. The ghost map and the zombie seeds. But let's step away from the fungi for a second and look at the birds again, because there is something about their behavior that defies logic. We mentioned the black-backed woodpecker traveling hundreds of miles to find a burn, but how does it know? How does a bird born in a green, unburnt forest know that a charred black wasteland is actually paradise? It is not like they have Google Maps. It is not like they have a weather app. This brings us to the theory of genetic memory, or epigenetics. This is a bit of a wild theory, but stick with me. The idea is that the map to the burnt forest isn't learned, it is inherited, it is written into their DNA. For thousands of years, birds that flew toward smoke survived and reproduced. Birds that flew away from smoke starved. Over generations, this behavior became hard-coded. So when a lazuli bunting smells smoke or sees the gray haze on the horizon, it doesn't feel fear, it feels a biological pull. A switch flips in its brain that says, "Go there, that is home." It is an ancestral instinct waking up. But here is where it gets spooky. We are talking about zombie seeds. In the soil of California, there are seeds that have been buried for 50, maybe 100 years. They are deep down in the dirt, totally asleep. To any lab test, they might look dead. They are covered in layers of dirt and time, but these seeds are waiting for a specific chemical trigger. Smoke is made of thousands of different chemicals. One of them is a compound called karakin. It is named after the Aboriginal word for smoke. When karakin water, created when rain washes smoke into the soil, hits these zombie seeds, it acts like a resurrection potion. It breaks their dormancy. Suddenly, plants that haven't been seen in that area for a century burst out of the ground. This leads to a phenomenon called a super bloom. You might see flowers that were considered extinct in that region suddenly covering the hillsides in purple and orange. This suggests that the true forest isn't the one we see every day. The green forest with the big pines might actually be just one phase. The real biodiversity is hidden, locked away in a seed bank that only opens with fire. By suppressing fire, we are essentially keeping the forest in a coma. We are preventing it from waking up and showing its true colors. We are locking away the zombie seeds and preventing the birds from accessing their ancestral home. And there is another theory that is even more out there: acoustic navigation. We know birds sing to mark territory, but what does a burnt forest sound like? To us, it is quiet, but to a bird, the acoustics of a burnt forest are totally different from a green one. Without leaves to dampen the sound, calls can travel much further. A woodpecker drumming on a hollow, burnt tree creates a sound that can be heard for miles. It is like a drum solo in an empty stadium. You might look at a burnt forest and see a graveyard. You see black stumps, gray ash, and total silence. But that is just because you are looking with human eyes. If you were a bird, you wouldn't see a graveyard. You would see the world's greatest concert hall. Some researchers believe that birds are actually using these dead trees as giant amplifiers. Think about it. In a normal thick forest, everything is covered in leaves and moss. It is soft. If you shout in a dense jungle, the sound dies pretty fast. The vegetation absorbs the noise like a pillow. But a burnt forest? It is stripped clean. The wood is hard, dry, and hollow. When a woodpecker drums its beak against a hollow burnt trunk, that sound doesn't just stop, it booms, it travels. The fire has essentially cleared out all the soundproofing. It turns the landscape into a high-tech sound studio where every note is crisp and clear. So for the black-backed woodpecker and other fire-chasing birds, the burnt forest isn't a disaster zone. It is a singles bar. It is the ultimate nightclub with perfect acoustics. They flock there not just because the beetle larvae are tasty, but because it is the best place to find a girlfriend. They can broadcast their signals to mates over massive distances that would be impossible in a green, living forest. This changes how we have to look at the recovery process. We usually think nature is quiet and fragile while it heals. But in reality, it is loud, rowdy, and desperate to reproduce. The fire didn't kill the vibe, it turned up the volume. But this leads to a terrifying possibility. We are starting to realize that we might be messing up the signal. Nature relies on these specific triggers, the smell of smoke, the heat, the clear acoustics, to kickstart the next generation. But what happens if we change the rules? If we suppress fires entirely for 100 years and then suddenly a mega fire burns so hot it turns the soil to glass, we are destroying the equipment. We are scrambling the signal. Even worse, we are seeing evidence that modern pollution might be masking the invisible signs that animals need. Think about the beetles that chase smoke. They have biological sensors that can sniff out a forest fire from miles away. They know exactly where to go to lay their eggs. But what happens if the air is full of smog? If the wind is thick with car exhaust and factory fumes, can the beetles still smell the burning wood from 10 miles away? If the city noise is too loud, can the woodpeckers hear the drumming on the dead trees? We might be jamming the frequencies that nature uses to rebuild itself. We are essentially walking into that high-tech sound studio and blasting static noise over the speakers. We tend to think of nature as fragile, something that breaks easily and needs us to fix it with planning programs and careful management. But these theories suggest nature is actually a sleeping giant. It doesn't need us to tuck it in, it is waiting for the right trigger to wake up. The fire isn't the end of the story, it is the alarm clock. It rings, and the beetles wake up. The seeds crack open. The birds start drumming. The problem isn't that the forest is burning. The problem is that we have forgotten how to read the clock. We look at the ash and we panic. We try to suppress the fire, or we rush in to clean up the dead trees, thinking we are helping. We are trying to keep the giant asleep because we are afraid of what it looks like when it wakes up. We prefer the green, quiet forest because it feels safe. But as the birds in Sonoma County proved, the waking up part is where the magic happens. That chaotic, messy, loud period right after the smoke clears is when the forest is most alive. If we keep interfering, we might not just lose the trees. We might lose something much more important. We could lose the invisible map, the underground brain, and the genetic history that holds the whole world together. We are playing with a system that is millions of years older than us. A system that knows exactly how to survive an apocalypse, and we are doing it blindfolded. So here's the real question. If nature's response to removal is to make the animal stronger, is it time we stopped fighting the coyote and started learning to live with it? Or do you think we just haven't found the right method yet? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this mystery, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild stories.